On this video, I'm going to give you my thoughts and pros and cons on Project Elite, the new monster box game from Artipia and Cool Mini or Not, reprinted in its second edition compared to its first one that was done many years ago. It's got a hefty price point, a hefty box size, and a lot of miniatures. Is it justified? Let's go into detail. Hi everyone, thanks for tuning in to another Broken Meeple review video. I'm Luke Hector, and if you like what you see, please don't forget to click the subscribe button and press the bell for future notifications on content. Of course, everything I discuss in this video will be provided as links in the description below. Project Elite is a co-op sci-fi survival game where you must defend yourselves against waves and waves of oncoming aliens while completing objectives as a team. These objectives can range from exterminating nests, to exploring the area, to reconning locations, etc. You can play this between 1 to 6 players, and it is set in real time, which means that after you are done spawning enemies and doing initial movements, you then have a 2-minute timer period where you and the rest of your teammates must roll dice in order to do various actions such as move and shoot, and deal with the aliens as they come. In those 2 minutes, you are frantically rolling dice like crazy, trying to get the symbols that you need to do your actions, moving, shooting, searching, activating specific items, and in order to do the activations you must move the dice with the correct symbols to the cards themselves in order to trigger the action itself. All of this you can keep re-rolling as much as you like. However, one symbol on the die is a nasty one where you have to move an alien piece forward, so as you are trying to do your actions, the aliens are constantly moving slowly towards you, at which point you then get to the 2-minute timer at the end, and you must then do some resolutions before eventually you spawn more enemies and then repeat the process over again. Now, this wouldn't be a sci-fi alien game with plenty of characters and lots of high-tech weaponry.
We got nukes, we got knives, sharp sticks.
Here you can choose from various characters that start up with their own special ability and different damage tracks, and at the start of the game you are able to search various locations in order to find lots of different items such as med kits and scanners, as well as upgrading your weapon from your boring little pistol that you began with and upgrading to that mega sniper laser or grenade launcher or high-tech BFG that you've wanted for so long. Players will continue to play the game until one of various conditions is met to end the game. If you complete your objectives and manage to get yourself back to the starting area, you will win the game. However, if you are unable to survive or you don't complete the objective within an 8-round timer, you will end up losing the game. You must also keep an eye on the aliens themselves, because their one goal is not just to necessarily kill you, it's to get to your starting area and overwhelm your base. If any alien manages to get in your starting area, that's an automatic loss. It's frantic, it's chaotic, it's essentially the movie Aliens in a box set. The question is it any good? We need to talk in detail about this. For D for duration, where I talk about the length of the game, does it overstay its welcome? Now, this is actually quite a high point for Project Elite. The game itself does not take very long. It's probably about an hour you're talking for most games that you will play once you're familiar with the rules. Add another 15-20 minutes on if you're teaching the rules as well. So an hour and a half, absolute tops. And this doesn't depend on the player count, because spawning the enemies is just done at the same time based on player count rules. Then the time phase, the 2-minute phase, let's say you're spending about half an hour of the game at least, maybe more, on that time phase alone. That time phase is simultaneous. So having 2 players there, having 6 players there, doesn't make any difference. It's still the same 2 minutes. And then as for resolving everything, again, that's just done based on the aliens. Now granted, if you have more players, you will have more aliens to resolve, but they're pretty straightforward in how they move, they're pretty straightforward in what their attacks are, so it shouldn't take much in the way of additional time to do it with more players. So Project Elite manages to keep itself to a nice condensed level without overstaying its welcome. Moving on to E for ease of play. How easy is the game to grasp? Are the rules complex? Are there lots of fiddly nuances you gotta deal with? Well, this was what I was the second most afraid of in this game when I opened the box. I thought, oh, big monster box with a bunch of miniatures. Is this gonna cause a problem? Thankfully, that wasn't the case here. The rules themselves may look quite like complex and nuanced. You know, there's a lot of pages in here, but a lot of it is done by pictorial representations and going through the action phase in detail. But as you read through the rules, you find it's actually not a very complex game. Spawning enemies and resolving their movement is very straightforward. The board has arrows all over it, which makes it look a little bit busy over the course of the game, but it's not too bad. But this dictates how the aliens move, so you don't have to think, all right, well, how does this alien move? Easy. You read the card, it says it moves 2 or 3 spaces, you look at the board, there's the path it can go on, move it. If it goes into a space with another alien, they just push them along. Essentially, you can end up with like one big conga line full of aliens going around. Not difficult at all. The actions themselves, again, you have to go through a lot of different actions as you're explaining the rules. So I need to know what search does, I need to know what move does, I need to know what fire does. There's a reasonable amount you've got to absorb, but they're not tricky. It's not particularly fiddly or complex. The rulebook itself is not particularly ambiguous. It goes into a decent amount of detail into the actions you need without overstaying itself, without making it too fiddly and complex. I felt that as I was reading through the book, by taking my time with it, I was able to understand it pretty well. And the most crucial element that you're likely to need to know, the line of sight rules. If you've played any other skirmish game on the planet, you will recognize these line of sight rules. Take the center of a square, draw a straight line. Can you see the center of the square of the enemy? If so, you can shoot it. So pretty much, as long as it doesn't go through a solid wall, you're okay. And unlike the original Zombicide and a couple of those older skirmish games, there's no fiddliness about, oh, this blocks your line of sight, this blocks your line of sight when it comes to people and aliens. Nope, solid objects like massive trees and forests and stone walls will block your line of sight. Well, duh. But a person and an alien doesn't. If the alien's 3 steps behind another alien, doesn't matter. I can still shoot it. And that just gets rid of a lot of unnecessary complication that you do get. And when you're doing this by yourself effectively in a timed phase where you don't have time to ask each other for rules, that's probably a good thing. However, this does add a little bit of a caveat, shall we say, to the ease of play, because each person needs to be comfortable with what they're doing before the time phase begins. 2 minutes is a short time. You do not have time to ask rules questions during those 2 minutes. You've kind of just got to go with it, and you have to be able to trust that everybody is doing it correctly, because everybody's going to be scrambling over the board trying to move aliens and sort their character out. So it needs a little bit of pre-prep ahead of time, but once everybody's comfortable with the game, it should be smooth as butter. Moving on to T for tactics and strategy. Do the mechanics work well? Is there a lot of depth to the game, or is it just a complete luck fest? Well, there's an element of luck in this game. You're rolling dice, and the dice could hose you, they might not. You know, you could be rolling, constantly trying to get that movement symbol and it just doesn't turn up. All the while, you're rolling the alien symbol constantly and they move. So you are going to have to put up with the fact that in its very nature, this is not a strategic game. You do have time between the time phases to plan what you're going to do. Maybe set a role for a different character, saying you're going to be the guy who sits at the base and makes certain that all the ones who come past us don't get to the base. You're going to grab a ton of items and then give it to us. You two, you're going to rush the front and get to those nests to exterminate them. You can at least plan to an extent, but then as soon as you start rolling for the time phase, all bets are off. There is also the luck element of the spawning of the aliens. You have to have a huge deck of cards for spawning the normal aliens, and you may get a ton of the same alien in a row. They might all congregate in one cluster, they might be spread out, it varies, and some of them might activate the second they come out. You could chain a few of these cards together and end up with a world of pain. But this isn't the bigger problem. The bigger problem I have is the bosses. The bosses themselves are cool. They come in different guises, they've all got different abilities and stats, and they look cool from the miniatures. The problem is the boss spawn is also another deck of cards where you have all clear and the boss spawns themselves. You shuffle this deck at random and there you go. So you could end up with a situation where you don't see a boss for most of the game, but then you might also end up with a situation where 5 bosses come out in a row, and if that happens, you might as well call the game over at that point, because you just will not be able to cope with that many bosses and that many aliens, because the aliens don't stop. Now, despite the game being a co-op, you need to be aware that during the timed element, the 2-minute mark, you're kind of playing your own solitaire game in a sense. Yes, everybody's going to be rolling dice and shouting profusely everywhere, but at the end of the day, you've only got 2 minutes. You don't have time to discuss tactics and change your mind and grab another person and just go, oh, hang on a minute, what do we do here? It's like, no, you are pretty much doing your own solitaire part during the time phase. Once things settle down and calm down a bit, then you get a chance to actually say, right, okay guys, what do we do next? So moving on to A for aesthetics, where I talk about the component quality, the art quality, and the value for money. Here, generally it's good, however, you are paying for it. The artwork is decent, even though you have to put up with a lot of the graphic design of those red arrows all over the board. You kind of zone through that quite quickly and you can see, oh yeah, there's the landscape, there's the crash site, the abandoned lab, whatever. But the artwork is generally pretty good on the cards as well. There's only so much of it, but there's nothing bad about it per se. Now, you are paying for something in this box, and you're paying for the miniatures. The components in general are half decent cards, half decent boards. It's kind of what you'd expect to see. The problem when you get good aesthetics though, particularly miniatures, is that there's a cost. In this case, it is the cost. It's the £70 odd price mark in the UK that this game is asking for in retailers, and that's quite expensive for a game. Granted, Kickstarters, that's a whole different breed, but here, retail release, you're talking £70, 65 on a good deal, 75 on an RRP, and it's like, whoa, okay. It's like, and what are you paying for? Well, we'll go on to some issues with that certainly a bit later, but for now, you're paying for those miniatures. The miniatures are decent quality, but if you took those miniatures out, I would like to think that this game would be half the cost. It's a big box, yeah, but for the boards and some cards and tokens, this game wouldn't cost anywhere near £75. It's typical cool mini or not affair. If you're willing to spend that much money on the game, then you're getting good quality for it, but it's quite a price point. So I is for immersion factor, and that is the theme, how strong it is, how engaging it is, how well it's integrated into the mechanics. Here is probably this Project Elite's strongest point. You are definitely playing effectively Aliens the board game, at least until Gale Force 9 actually release Aliens the board game. But in this case, you've got the aliens coming in swarms. They're constantly coming at you. There's no end to them. You are there trying to shoot off every single one with whatever cool laser, grenade launcher, BFG rifle you have, and it definitely puts you in that state of, a tower in a sense a tower defense game, although it varies by objective, but just certainly that instance of there's a huge swarm of enemies, we don't have enough time to take care of them all, we barely have the weaponry to survive, we need to get our objectives done quick and get back to the starting area. So it really does well on that. And if you want to interject even more theme into the game, you can get the app, which is a free download which gives you a timer as well as some music to back the game with. Although, you want a personal tip? Might I suggest you grab the soundtrack to Aliens, the movie, and then find the tracks where Ripley evacuates the base at the end and also where the Marines encounter the aliens for the first time. Those two battle sequences, do those tracks with this game and yes, the immersion factor goes up to 12. Now in terms of engagement, you are generally engaged throughout the game. I mean, in that 2-minute time phase, you are constantly there grabbing at each other, going for stuff, literally like clawing each other in order to get at the Marines and the dice and everything. But with the engagement, you're even outside that 2-minute time phase, you're doing pretty well. Everybody's sitting there and discussing, okay, what's the plan for next thing? While I'm spawning the enemies, what are you going to do? Are you going to stay back at the base? Are you going to help me with this? We need to get to this objective here. So you're discussing things outside of the time phase, and then in the time phase, even though it is a bit of a solitaire arrangement, you're still in there. You're rolling the dice, you're chucking away aliens, you're doing stuff. You don't get time to catch a breath. And now we go into L for longevity, which is where I talk about the replay value and how well it scales by player. This is where Project Elite takes the biggest knock in the whole range of this detailed review. Firstly, the player scaling. It's not good. This game is supposed to do 1 to 6 players, so you think, oh good, a wide range of player counts I can play it as. Good luck with that. 2 of these player counts are decent, they're good, they're the best way to play it. 2 of these are fine if you have the perfect setup. 2 of these I would not want to play ever again in my life. 3 to 4 player is the sweet spot. You get 3 to 4 players, you get a good balance of difficulty as well as chaos around the table and also the practicality of being able to sit around the table and reach for everything. Yeah, why am I saying practicality? Because if you go to 5 and 6 players, that goes out the window. If you're afraid of COVID at this point of doing this video, then this is the worst game you can possibly buy if you think you're going to play it with 5 or 6 players, because you need to be able to reach stuff on the board. You know, chuck minions away, grab the dice and everything. If you're 5 or 6 players, you've got to find a table that can house this fairly big board with all the pieces, seat 5 or 6 of you round it, and have everybody be able to reach for the various stuff. Unless you are standing around the table, which is probably the recommended way I say to do it, you're going to struggle with that. You know, certainly on a Geekerson table like I've got in the other room, if I sit 6 people around that, not everybody's going to be able to reach everything. So on the kitchen table downstairs, again, you're probably not going to be able to reach for everything. So 5 to 6 players is beyond chaotic in general, but because of the whole solitaire nature of the time phase, it's not as bad. It's still fun with 5 to 6, but you're going to need the perfect setup to make that work. But then you get into the 1 and 2 player count and whoo-wee, this is bad. Very bad. In fact, I'm not even convinced that this game was properly developed for 1 to 2 players. I think the box should have said 3 to 6, probably 3 to 5, and should have stuck with it. 2 players, you have 2 characters, 1 each, with 4 dice apiece. The difficulty curve though, even though you get 1 less objective marker in a game, it's still pretty hard. 2 of you find it very difficult to cover enough ground whilst also having enough dice to lock into the objectives, because you don't have any less dice to do with the objectives, you instead have less objective markers. But trying to find 4 dice of the same symbol to lock into an objective marker when there's only 2 of you against hordes of aliens, that's not an easy thing to do. It's hard enough with 3 or 4 players, let alone with 2. I've yet to see a win with 2 players, but I reckon if the dice go your way and the Elder Gods smile upon you, then maybe you can win it with 2, but it's not a good experience. It's even worse though when you go into solo mode, and this is where it's the biggest disappointment for me, because I was hoping that this game would be a fantastic solo experience for me, because I love Aliens, the movie, I love this kind of thing, but solo experience is so bad. And you know what the first warning I got was? The rulebook. You read the solo bit in the rulebook and it's one of the first things you find after setup. It's half a page long. There are 3 bullet points. 2 of them pretty much just say set up as if you were a 2-player game. 2 heroes and spawn aliens as a 2-player game. The problem is you have the same number of objectives as a 2-player. You have the same number of aliens. And the only change for a 2-player game is you have 5 dice, not 4, but you've got to split them between the 2 heroes each round. In what possible region of hell is it possible to win this game in solo mode? That is not enough dice. 2 players can barely cover enough ground as it is, with 8 dice. You expect to do it with 5. And the argument they use, and this is the same with a lot of time games, they think, oh, because it's only you doing the thinking, it will be easier than if it's 2 of you doing the thinking. Except that each player does things by themselves. So it's not 2 players having to discuss and think, it's technically 1 player just repeated multiple times. So you now have 3 less dice, 4 less dice if you take the marksman, which basically just puts it into impossible mode, and you're supposed to do the same objectives against the swarms. It's not possible. They spawn too rapidly. You will not be able to do the objectives in the time that you are given and still cover all the bases. So my final word on Project Elite is that when you get the setup just right, it is a fun, frantic and engaging co-op experience. It looks the part, it's relatively straightforward to play, and it doesn't take too long to play either, and the theme is spot on with its integration. However, it is hampered by A, the huge price point, but B, also the fact that the replay value is questionable with the bad player scaling as well as the lack of decent differentiation between the missions. Add to that the random elements that the game could just tank by bad luck of the draw, and the fact that timed mechanics require you to be proficient with the rules before you even start playing, and for players new to gaming and that, this could be quite tricky. It is held back by some of those problems, and I hate the fact that it is no good for 1 and 2 players. I mean, I don't play 2-player games that often either, but certainly I was really banking on a good solo mode here, and frankly the game might as well have just said 3 to 5 players and it would have been better for that. So overall, a little disappointing for me, but still worth it if you can get the right setup, and I would give this a 7 out of 10 overall. I was questioning it about being a 6, but I think it's fair to give it a 7 because if you are going to play this with 3 to 6 players and you have that set up, I think you will get a decent amount of bang for your buck, even though it is a high price point to ask for, because when it is done right, it is really good fun. And if someone was to bring this to the table and suggest it and we had 4 of us to play it, I would jump in. So I wouldn't necessarily want to keep this game, but I would certainly want to play it if it was offered at a convention. So that's it for me on this Project Elite review. If you like what you see and I've earned your subscription, please click on the button in the center of the screen. If you want, you can check out some more of my content, including my town garden review or my podcast episode where I talk with Jeremy Howard from Man vs. Meeple. Until I see you next time, take care, stay safe, and remember, it's only a game.